Hello, I'm Michael Camp, and here are a few thoughts on redemption for this 12th Sunday after Trinity. Redemption is one of those big theological words, isn't it? We all know it, but find it a bit mysterious. Well, many billions of words have been written about it over the centuries, so I'm not going to crack it all today, but I hope this might open up a few ways into it for you. For today, we'll begin with Moses and the burning bush. Seeing that bush burning but not being consumed stopped Moses in his tracks, and he came to realize he was in the presence of Almighty God. Not only that, but he also came to know that he was being called by God for an important task. He was to work with God to bring redemption to the people of Israel. They were slaves in Egypt, and God and Moses together were going to free them, bring them out, give them a new future. So for them, redemption was about freedom from slavery, freedom to determine their own way. So let's now park that thought for a moment and turn to the Gospel reading from St. Matthew chapter 16. Here we find Jesus telling his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and that he must suffer and die. That was such a hard thing for the disciples to hear, and Peter immediately reacted against it. Here's the thing, though. Within days of Jesus' death, his apostles were telling people that it was good news for us. In the Gospels and in the epistles of the New Testament, they suggest to us that the pain and the suffering and the death of Jesus have somehow brought about something they call redemption. That is to say that because of Jesus' cross, humanity has been brought back into its right relationship with God. Because of Jesus' cross, there is a hopeful and eternal new future for God's creation and for all of us who are part of it. Remember that new future God promised to the Hebrew people in Moses' time? Well, here's a similar promise. So what's happening here is that God is taking something really awful and painful and agonizing, and he's turning it to good account. He's making something evil serve his good purposes. He's not allowing pain and wrong to have the last word. He is showing that when pain and evil have done their worst, he can still bring the very best out of it. That's what redemption is all about. Taking what is bad and finding deep within it a new and perhaps unexpected goodness. Now, it's really important here that we don't expect that goodness to take all the pain and evil away. God's redemption didn't heal Jesus' wounds. The risen Christ showed Thomas the wounds that were still there in his hands and his side. God's redemption doesn't take pain away. What God does is to use the pain of Jesus to do something good. He uses it to achieve nothing less than the salvation of the world. Jesus' suffering is redeemed because through it we are redeemed. We are brought to eternity with God. So that's the big picture, the salvation of the world. But all through this story, we've also heard calling other people to work with him, haven't we? In the burning bush, Moses heard God's call to lead the people out. In the gospel, Jesus called his followers to take up their cross just as he would do himself. Let us then hear God's call to us. We are called to live and to speak God's redemption. We are called to bring redemption about and to do that every day in all sorts of small ways. If God's redemption of the world through the cross of Christ is the big picture of redemption, let's look for the many millions of small ones too. Here are some examples. When George Floyd was killed in America earlier this year, it changed the world, didn't it? Racism is one of the besetting sins of our world. We have been told about it time and time again, but prosperous white people like ourselves still find it very hard to hear the cry of the oppressed around us. Well, this year we've heard it louder and clearer than ever before, and that's a big challenge for us. When we see symbols of racism like that statue of the slave trader in Bristol torn down, and when we hear that the British Empire we've always been proud of was actually part of the problem, that's a challenge, isn't it? One we find hard to bear. But we do need to hear it, because it's really important that we make progress in rooting out racism from our society. And this might be an opportunity for a great leap forward. If the death of George Floyd forces us to make progress, then his death will be redeemed. It won't be healed, he won't suddenly be resurrected, but there will be redemption. The COVID pandemic is another example. It's an awful thing. It's caused untold problems for all of us. But it's also made us review our priorities, hasn't it? So many people are asking how we can use this experience to make our world better. That's redemption. If we can find some ways of using this time to make our world better, we shall begin to see some redemption. Well, those are big things, but there are millions of small opportunities for redemption that take place every day, and we can cooperate with God in spotting them and in working for redemption and in showing other people where God is at work in us and around us. We see illness, we see injury, we see disappointment, we see breakdowns in relationships, we see unemployment, we see all these things all around us all the time, and they're really tough. Much as we might want to, we can't always make them better. What we can do, though, is to seek for redemption. Often it won't be visible at the time, but we can work for it and seek it, and perhaps later on we shall spot where it took place. So in the depths of difficulty, let us keep our eyes open and our souls attuned so that we can see where God is working to bring redemption. Let us work with God to bring about redemption in a million small ways and to draw good out of the pain. And when you've done that, make sure you tell people where you spotted God at work bringing redemption.